Hi everyone, welcome to the preseason meeting as it was formerly referred to, and we're now calling it a preseason information session, a little more informal than in previous years. My name is Rob Campana. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the league president. I'm joined by Alex D'Aquila, the Eagle at Master Control, and Jason Leclerc, who's the chairman of our referee of our rules committee, will be joining us a little later on the call to go over the major rule changes for 2019. Which were voted in by the Rules Committee, and of course he'll be able to answer any questions you have as well. So welcome aboard. We encourage you guys to ask any questions that you may have. I know obviously not everyone is tuned in live, so but the people who are, you're more than welcome to ask away, ask as many questions as you'd like. Alex will interrupt me at some points if he feels that it's relevant or urgent, and I'll answer it on the fly. Otherwise, we'll kind of go through like a quick Q&A at the end. So that's it. So basically we're going to start off with the homepage of the website. So Alex, if you can make your way to the flagplusfootball.com homepage. So just to give a brief recap to the new teams, you can basically find your division by clicking on divisions, of course, on the main menu, and then finding your division there. The overview page for any division, so for instance Division 1, is basically where you'll find all the important information regarding your division, recap of it, most importantly the standings. So for each division, what you'll notice is that on some divisions there'll be the conference standings, and then there'll also be a division standing section. So Alex can show you to toggle over. Alex, you can toggle over the division standings. So for instance, Division 1, because there's only one conference in the division, there's no actual tab for both. But let's say we go to Division 4A as an example. You'll notice, actually no, that's a bad example. That's not a good example. Okay, so let's go to Division 5A. I apologize. So in Division 5A, there are two conferences and subdivisions therein. So you'll see that at the top of the conference standing, or at the top of the standings table, Alex is showing you there's the division standings where you'll be able to break it down per subdivision. And then if you toggle over to playoff standings right next to it, you'll be able to see a breakdown of not only who are the division leaders, but also the teams that currently sit in playoff spots. And anyone in red is currently in a non-playoff spot. So we're going to go over all this stuff tomorrow, of course, just to make sure everything is updated for each division, tiebreak info, everything is relevant and pertinent, specific for this season. But again, this could be your one-stop shop for your standings, the tiebreak info for your division specifically, and the playoff breakdown for the division, which again hasn't been updated just yet. So we will be going through them all tomorrow before the start of the season. All this information is available in English and French, disponible dans les deux langues pour ceux qui préfèrent voir ça en français. So that's basically it. You have the season leaders on the top right, which are specific to the division. You can toggle through all the different categories, all that fun stuff. And then, of course, if you go back to the main menu and click divisions, you can click under your division name and search for schedule, stats, weekly leaders, and so on. So that's all there. At the top of the site, some of you, if you're not sure where to find your team and you go through the division and try to find yourself in there, be sure that on the top of the website, there's two search bars. One is for player names, one is for team names. So you can always find your team name there. It's a quicker way to access it. So if we click on, let's find the team, Alex, Montreal's Finest, let's say. So we'll search Montreal's Finest. And
top of the list.
Top of the list, and you'll see here that on any team page, you'll have the full roster listed with all the players there, along with their games played and their ratings, all the stats for the players on the team specifically. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the schedule for each team. So that's pretty much a quick run through of the site.
Just keep in mind that the season that you are selecting for your team, so if you guys noticed as we type that in, there's a W19 in front of the team name. That corresponds to Winter 2019 season, which is the current season. So you can go back in the past and find other teams if you wanted to see other stats and everything. But keep in mind, W19 is the current season.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. If we go back to the main menu quickly, you see next to divisions, there's about, there's information. That's some stuff. If you're just curious about the league, about how some things work around FPF, you're more than welcome to read some of those links. Resources is something that's a little more relevant for the season. So if you click on that, in the leftmost column, you'll see that there's documents. Those are the ones that were emailed to today. So basically the rule book and the roster rules. I always strongly urge captains to go through the roster rules document very closely. We're going to be doing that somewhat this evening. I'll be going through some of the most important points in that document, but you should take the time to really go through it from start to finish. There are so many ways that teams can forfeit or break rules in FPF. Part of what makes the league great is also partially what makes it difficult to run a team and a bit of a headache at times because there are so many rules. But as captain, it's your responsibility to be aware of all these rules. Usually when we have to hand out a forfeit, it's not because teams are trying to cheat or trying to break a rule. 99 times out of 100, it's because the team was not aware of a rule. So please just take the 20 minutes to go through the document, understand it, and it'll really make your life a lot easier. Right next to that, you have Captain's Tools, and the roster verification is a very, very important tool that I would suggest you use. So anytime that you add a new player to your roster, it's always a good idea to just enter in the roster as it is for that game and just make sure that you fit under your division's cap. Because sometimes teams will say, oh, well, one guy wasn't there, but we brought in another guy, and I thought his rating was pretty much the same, or I thought we had the cap space. It'll take you 2 minutes to just fill out all the names here. It's always a good idea to make sure you verify your roster to make sure you're not breaking any rules. Calendar on the main menu.
Just one thing to mention here, Rob. For some players, you will have both a quarterback rating as well as a receiver rating. So when you're on this tool, please make sure to select the correct one. That way we know which one is the correct quarterback to take into account for your cap hit.
Okay, yeah, great, Alex. Good point for sure. So if we look at calendar, oftentimes people will ask me, for whatever reason, I'm looking to see if I can find a sub for my game. Do you know who's playing before me or after me? Sometimes guys will go through each division and try to find people playing at specific fields, which obviously will take you forever. If you ever want to get a snapshot of all the games that are being played across the league at every facility, specific date, then just use the calendar tool, click on a date, and all the games will pop up. So it's a nice little tool that I feel like not everybody knows about. Accolades, that's fun. If you want to kind of look back over the years and see who's won the most awards and championships and all that stuff, you can do that here. Contact is important. I'll mention it because there's a locations section, and in that location section, you'll see the addresses and basically Google Maps for all of our facilities, both current and fields that we're not using this season. Very important because oftentimes we take for granted when we say Lachine, people know it's the Catalonia Soccerplex, but for brand new teams, they may not know that. So in case you're curious, all addresses are listed under this locations tab. So that's pretty much it for the website run through. Alex, any last things we should mention maybe before we
I think that's generally it. If there's any times you can't find anything, just make sure the correct season is selected top right. And if you do have any questions or if there's any mistakes, if your name's not spelled properly or not capitalized, if you have a question about your rating, feel free to email us. Contact info is
info@flyquestfootball.com.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, or you can click on contact on the main menu and select something specific that you want to ask us about. So that's pretty much it. So now if we go back to resources and you click on the roster regulations, we'll work on the English document for the sake of today's presentation. So what I'll do specifically is I'll kind of go through the obviously a very important document, but I'll go through really emphasize the most important points in the document that I feel I should really put a spotlight on. And of course, you're encouraged to break it down even further.
Rob, we already have our first question.
Sure.
What's the penalty for a touchdown celebration?
Can I guess who asked it?
You were correct.
You can ask Jason that. I don't throw flags. I don't own a flag. I don't have anything to do with that. So you can ask Jason when he comes on later, Kendall. So all right. So general roster rules. So if we start off with point number 1, and we'll scroll down to point C. So Flag Plus Football places a maximum number of 3 teams a player can play on per season. In the winter and spring seasons, the maximum number is 3 teams. I'm sorry, I read that the wrong way. So it's always 3 teams in the winter or spring. Obviously, FPF Cup is different. Note, however, that auxiliary divisions such as co-ed or 35 plus do not count towards this maximum. So when you're adding, the reason we mention this is because there is a maximum. So if you're adding a player, even to sub on your team, if he or she already plays on 3 teams, or he, I should say, because it's part of the men's divisions, if he plays on 3 teams already, that player is not eligible to play on your team. So it's very important that you as a captain, when you're looking to recruit someone, whether it be for a part-time spot just for 1 game or to get someone on your roster full-time, make sure you know how many teams they're on. If they already are on 3 teams, they could possibly get a release from one of them, which we'll get to in a sec, but they cannot be on more than 3 active rosters at once. If we go to point 1D, a player is forbidden to be active on 2 teams in the same division at any point throughout the season. I think everybody knows this rule, but something that came up in the last few weeks that I was asked specifically and that more and more people are asking about is, can I play on a team, for instance, in 4A and 4B or 6 and 6D or 5A and 5B? The answer is no. If a division cannot be signed up for before the season, because these are divisions that we split after registrations, then you are not permitted to play on a team in both divisions. So if you're already on a Division 4 roster, regardless of whether it's A or B, you cannot play on another. So moving on to point 2 for player releases, was something I just alluded to earlier. If we look at point A, a player may request to be released from a team during the season. This is something that we've been doing now for over 10 years. If someone joins a team early in the season, they're not enjoying themselves, they don't like their role on the team, whatever the case may be. There's lots of reasons why people ask for releases. Sometimes it's strategic. I'm going to play for a team 1 week and then I'm going to be gone. But we do allow it. But point B says the release must be submitted to and approved by the league to be validated and officialized. So you can't just say, well, I assume that was released. You actually have to write into the league to get a formal release. The current week of the season must come to an end before release is considered valid. So very important in Flag Plus football. The weeks start on Saturday and the weeks end on Thursday. That means if you played on Saturday with a team and you say, I'd like to get released so I can play on Monday, unfortunately, that's not possible. It's part of the same week, so you need the week to end, and then, of course, you're eligible to continue on that other team. So I mentioned that there. The release is only official at the end of the week. So that's good. So if we go to point D of the same number, an individual can only be released once in a season. So as a result, a player cannot, for instance, get a release from Team A to go play for Team B, then get released from Team B and go back to Team A. Unfortunately, that's not possible. You're only allowed one release per season. That goes for all players across all divisions. Point E, once a player has participated in the team's 7th scheduled game of the season or later, he or she is no longer eligible for release from that particular team. In an 8-game season, so for co-ed or 35+, it would be changed to the team's 5th game of the season inclusively. So if someone's played their 5th game in co-ed or 35+, or their 7th game, in one of the men's divisions, they are no longer eligible for a release. Last point to bring up on this is point F. So retroactive releases are possible. This happens actually quite often. So let's say in week 9, someone says, you know what, I want to sub for a team. I'd like to get a release, and I played for team X in week 4 last. So that means that we can retroactively release you at the end of week 4, and that's totally fine, even if we actually do it during week 10. But we always ask, when was your last game with that team? If they say, it was week 7 or later, unfortunately, it is not possible. So that's how a retroactive release works, is that we may be past week 7, but as long as you didn't play past week 7, then we can retroactively release you. So moving on to point number 3, which is games played and attendance. So we'll go to point B, which I'd like to emphasize, is eligibility without participating. So FPF actually allows teams or players to benefit from getting a game played, which is so important in our league, of course, because everybody wants to make as many guys eligible for the playoffs as possible. We have something called the DNP, a did not play eligibility. So when you're at the field, you need to check in with the scorekeeper. This is very important. What happens very often is late in the season, people will say, hey, my player was at that game and he was sitting in the stands with his girlfriend, or he was sitting on the bench, and I always tell them the same thing. The scorekeepers have enough to worry about. They cannot scan the complex to see if someone is there. Most of the time, they do not know. If someone wants a game played and wants to check in, that's no problem, but they need to actually go to the scorekeeper and check in, because the photo is right there on the scorekeeping app, and the scorekeeper will gladly give them the game played. It should be mentioned that in a DNP situation, why it's so beneficial to the teams is that this player's rating does not count against the cap. So that's it, Alex. Should I mention also that a player, sometimes people would think in the past that this is for injured players only, guys would fake limp towards the scorekeeper. You do not need to be injured to get a DNP. You just need to be on the bench with the team during the game, and check in with the scorekeeper to get the eligibility.
But you can't actually play the game, is the thing.
Yeah,
right?
Of course, yeah. So if you're in uniform and you actually take the field, then of course all bets are off and your rating does count.
And that's also if, let's say, the team's 6 players and you're number 7, but you're like, no, I'm not actually playing, and someone gets hurt, you cannot introduce yourself to the game as of that point.
Absolutely. Good point. So jumping to point C is late arrivals. So a player can arrive late for any game. So we used to have a rule back in the day where if you arrived past halftime, you were no longer eligible to play. We then changed this rule because we understand people have lives outside of FPF, and sometimes they'll arrive to the field late. We shouldn't be penalizing guys for that. So as long as you're on the roster and you've played a game before, you can show up for the last play of the game and still be allowed to take the field and get the game credit, as long as the game is going on. if you are not on the roster, you cannot be added to a game once it has started. So that means we're 4 guys, the game we're 5 guys, for instance, someone gets hurt, or we're 6 and someone gets hurt, and I say, you know what, 3 minutes into the game, I could use another player, and I kind of go grab someone and say, okay, add this person to our roster. The game's already started, that person doesn't exist on your roster yet, they cannot be added since the game has already started. So that's the clarification as far as late arrivals, because a lot of people still think that the old rule still applies, where someone can't play past halftime. Eligibility without being present. This is something we've done for a while, and we're going to elaborate on in the next point with something new. But basically, if someone is injured during the season, they were injured or ill to the point where they couldn't be present for games, then they can always get a medical doctor's note to basically confirm that they were sick or they were injured, and FPF will grant them playoff eligibility. People always worry, are people lying? Or, I mean, in the end, it's a doctor's note. If you're able to get a doctor's note, just like your employer wouldn't be able to contest it, Recreational Flag Football League, we're not going to do that. We'll be happy to take it and grant you eligibility. That being said, do not come with a physiotherapist note. Do not come with an athletic therapist note. Do not come with a note from your best friend. We will not.
Happens to be an athletic
exactly.
therapist.
Yeah. We will not accept that. So it has to be from a medical doctor, and the dates have to align. So if the doctor says, it's week 1 of the season, he says the person cannot perform physical activity for a week, well, you would have still been able to play your 5 games to be eligible. So very important there. Okay, so that's that. So now something very important that we added, which is new this year, is point E. This is a major point of emphasis for tonight's presentation because it's brand new, so we want people to understand it. So after much controversy and after many requests over the years, what we've noticed, and I posted about this on the Facebook group a few months ago, we've started to see more and more playoff forfeits. And at first we were shocked because playoff forfeits sound so terrible and you would think they'd never happen. But what happens is that more and more teams are building smaller rosters of 7, 8, 9 guys. And what happens is that guys get hurt over the course of the season. And by the time the playoffs come, if someone, for instance, is out of town or away and, with the injuries compounded, they're basically stuck to play with 5 guys and sometimes even less than 5, and they choose to forfeit, or they're forced to forfeit, I should say. So what we decided to do is to try to eliminate that as best as possible. Of course, the contrarian argument is that, people are going to try to take advantage of the rule and so on and so forth. So basically, this IR rule works the same way as the doctor's note would work to give someone eligibility for the playoffs. Well, in this case, because the argument always was, I can get a doctor's note to make me eligible for the playoffs if I was injured during the regular season, but I'm ready to play come playoff time. But inversely, if someone played all regular season, but then they get injured during playoff time, there was nothing to help the team for that. So enter this new rule. We're introducing it to try to minimize the occurrence of playoff forfeits, teams with small rosters, yada, 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 as I just mentioned. So subsequently, if a player suffers a serious injury or has a grave illness that ends his or her season, a team now has the opportunity to place that player on IR and get him or her replaced with someone else who will be able to then be granted playoff eligibility under this IR rule. I should mention, what was it? There's actually, okay, it's in the points there. So this, unlike Rule 3D, is in regard to playoffs who cannot play in the playoffs. The main caveat is that to avoid abuse of this rule, the team must absolutely present a doctor's note from a medical doctor only, clearly stating that the injured player or sick player is not able to engage in physical activity, i.e. play flag football, over an extended period of time, thus making him or her inactive for the playoffs. Listed below are the stipulations and clarifications. So very important, all these apply. So point 1, the new player does not have any. The new player does not have to have played any games with the team prior to joining the roster. So even if the person has 0 games played, is not on the roster, they're eligible to be added as this IR fill-in. 2, the new player taking on the spot of the IR individual can be added at any time before the team's first playoff game. This means that in a rare exception where a player got injured in the last week of the season, the added player may not have played one single game, again, similar to the last point, but still be granted playoff eligibility. The injured player must have played enough games or have been on pace to play enough games to be playoff eligible. So as an example, if Alex plays on a team, he's only has 2 games played in week 8, so he's not eligible to make. Well, technically, actually, if you have an 11-game schedule, you could be. But you get my point. If you're it's week 10 and you only have 3 games played and you're not eligible to make the playoffs, well, you can't be replaced under this IR rule.
So, Rob, I do have a question
Sure.
ahead of time because
Yeah.
we're not going to get this one. Are we effectively transferring the number of games played from the injured player onto the reserve player? Or are we predicting that the injured player would have had enough games and therefore making the other player fully eligible for playoffs as of that point?
Yeah, that's a great point, Alex. So if someone gets hurt late in the season, it's easier because we're just transferring their games played. Like, let's say it happens in week 10, the person was playoff eligible, we transfer their eligibility to a new player. If someone gets hurt in the middle of the season, then essentially we're saying, well, this person would have been eligible to continue on and become playoff eligible, but the player that they're adding, technically, we would encourage teams to say, well, the combination of the two, so either the injured player alone or the injured player in combination with the player who's replacing him, need to have the 5-game minimum, right? So that's a good question, which is actually not in these points, and it's good that you bring it up, and that's obviously why Eagle is Eagle. But that's a great point, is that if Alex gets injured in week 3, and then the team waits till the end of the season and says, okay, we're going to replace Alex with this guy on IR, well, no, you would have had to have done that earlier in the season because Alex himself didn't have enough games to be playoff eligible, and obviously the new player hasn't had any games. So that's a great point. The combination of the two, or the injured player alone, needs to have the 5 games played. Okay, so to follow up on the point above, a doctor's note can allow us to backtrack, meaning a player can submit a medical note. So basically, you know, if someone is injured and we get a note later on, a few weeks later, it doesn't have to be presented like the week of. The new rule is in place to counter injuries and illnesses only. So vacations, dropouts, any other situation cannot be accepted. There was some people that had suggested that we make exceptions for other stuff. That's not what we're doing for now. Of course, we're always open to revisiting these things as we move forward. But for now, it's strictly for injuries and illnesses. Now, I can remind you that, remember, if someone is injured over the course of the season and they feel like they'll be able to play, I should have probably mentioned this in the last point, but if someone is injured and they feel like they're going to be back in time for the playoffs, they're allowed to come to the field and check in and get their game played. So if someone says, oh, well, I can't get a doctor's note or whatever, well, you still have the opportunity to come to the field, hang out with your friends during the game, and check in with the scorekeeper. This is strictly for players who are not able to make it to the field. So this is why we're really strict in asking for a doctor's note, because we're assuming that you were either too sick or too injured to make it to the field. Otherwise, you're expected to show up to the field 5 times and get your eligibility. All right, so continuing on to point 6, the added player must have a current FPF rating that is equal to or lower than the player he or she is replacing. This is very important, so you cannot replace a player. Even if you fit under the cap with this new player you're adding and they're 20 points stronger than the person you're replacing, it doesn't work like that. They need to be of a lower rating than the other player.
And that applies for both offense,
yeah,
defense?
so let's see what we wrote here. So it says the added player must have a current FPF rating that is equal to or lower than the player he or she is replacing. In addition, any FPF member who presently holds an entry-level base rating from any division is not eligible for the to be the replacement player. A new player must have had at least one updated rating, either on offense or defense, since entering the league to be eligible. So, okay, so that doesn't answer Alex's question. So to address this point is that if someone is a 55 because they're new to FPF, we're saying there's a chance that these players, because they were never re-rated and never actually received a rating specific to them, and they're just carrying a base rating, we can't confirm that this player is actually qualified to carry that rating. You may have someone who's a Division 1 talent who came into the league and is using a 55 label. So for that reason, it needs to be someone who has been re-rated at least once. To answer Alex's question, so let's see here. It's not actually addressed, Alex. So that's something that we're going to have to follow. We're going to have to follow up with the captains for. I would suggest, just off the top of my head here now, that the player needs to be rated below on both sides of the ball. Maybe we could think of an idea of a cumulative like offense and defense together. That's something that Alex and I and the brain trust of FPF will discuss, and we'll follow up with you in the coming days. So this is why we have these presentations, so I can look stupid on camera. Now I know how a politician feels.
You're welcome.
Okay, so point 7, the added player must respect the usual FPF roster rules, so not play on another team in the same division, cannot exceed a maximum of 3 teams, so that stuff's still in place. Point 8, if a player is IR'd, he or she is ineligible to play in any FPF division for the rest of the current season. So if Alex is on a Division 5 team, he says, I'm IR'd, I'm going to be replaced by John Smith, but then he continues to play in Division 4 or comes back to play in Division 4, then that point is completely, that player is no longer eligible for this rule. So you have to be out for the season. And there are no, finally, last point, number 9, there are no maximum IR spots per team, so long as the criteria above is met for each injured player. So you can have 2 or 3 players, even if that means Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, but you can only replace one injured player with another injured player. You cannot replace one person with two people.
Correct. So you can't bring in one guy for week one of the playoffs and then week so one guy is replaced by one. Yeah, great point. So that's it. So that's, if anybody has questions for that, of course, fire away. So point F of the same number is deadline to contest a missing game played. So this is something that's very important that a lot of people don't know, is put yourself in our shoes. Oftentimes guys will reach out to us in week 9 or 10 of the season and say, hey, wait a minute, I promise you in week 3 this guy was at the game and he didn't get the game played, or the scorekeeper missed him or something like that. So as you can imagine, anybody can say that about any player. We're not filming games other than 1 or 2 per week, so it would be hard to prove anything. So it's basically one of those things where if we can't prove it across the board, then we can't start taking people's word for it, because it just won't work that way. Why have a rule otherwise? So the rule that we have is the deadline, in the event of a player participating in or attending a game but accidentally not receiving credit for it, a team has a maximum of 7 days to contest any inconsistency regarding a missing game played. Once that 7-day window is gone, unfortunately, you are not eligible to contest the GP.
And just for everyone's information, the score sheet is usually up within, I would say, 6 hours of playing your game. So this isn't like, it takes 3-4 days to get the information up, and now you have to try and figure it out and the whole thing. You literally have that information at your fingertips. So the next morning when you're sitting at work, when you're sitting on the toilet, go check to see the box score, see if you have all your players' games played, and if someone's missing, just let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't happen very often, which is why we're always a little bit like near the news, like, are you sure?
Yeah.
But definitely something to go check.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So yeah, absolutely, and that's it. Another thing, as captain, you always need to be on top of this stuff. If you're taking charge of the team, or if someone else is going to take charge of the team, it's very important that you be on top of this stuff, because again, dealing with 200 plus teams, anybody could just reach out to us in week 8 or week 9 or week 10 and say, hey, a month and a half ago my guy was there and he didn't get his stats. We go far and above, like what most recreational leagues do. We have obviously with our iPad scorekeeping app, we have the photos of all the players. So when something is fresh, I mean, mistakes can happen, but when something's fresh in our mind and I ask the scorekeeper, hey, like, do you recognize this guy that he played last game? It's a lot easier for him to do that on a game that was a few days ago. But once we start getting into 4 or 5 weeks past due, of course, it's no longer possible. So that's it. Okay, so moving on to point 4, which is playoff eligibility. This will be quick. I just want to specify point B here. So in a 10-game season, the minimum number of games played is 5. In both winter and spring, we've lowered it from 6, which it always was. And in an 8-game season, the minimum number of games played is 4. So that means you essentially have to show up for half the games to be considered eligible for the playoffs. So if we move on to point 5, we talk about forfeits. So as of spring 2018, there are 2 different types of forfeits, and the scores are different and they're reflected differently. So point A, we look at category 1, which is a no-show forfeit. This will result in a 60-0 defeat in the box score. So a team that does not have enough players to play and declares forfeit, that's what a category 1 forfeit is. So there's some more stuff there that kind of you can read about. That's a little bit more specific. There's also a rule that we added, which happens very rarely, but in the final week of the season, if a playoff team or a team that's destined for the playoffs forfeits their last game of the season, so in week 10 or week 11, they're automatically eliminated from playoff contention that year. And that's happened because a few times over the years, teams that had, for instance, a fixed spot in their playoff tree, they couldn't move up, they couldn't move down, they had some injuries, and they said, you know what, we're just going to sit this week out. We absolutely don't want that, of course. So that's a rule that we put in. Very rare exception, but it is the case.
There was also a time where a 60-0 was better than a potential points against, so you just accepted it and was going to hold on to a playoff seed, so now you lose it. Yeah.
So category 2 is the one that's a little more common, which is an administrative forfeit. The final score in games like this are 30-0, not 60-0. There's a list here from A to E of different reasons that your team can qualify to forfeit a game. So hopefully none of these happen to you and your team over the course of the season, but please read these carefully. It's mostly stuff regarding cap, QB cap, game ejections, guys being on a maximum number of rosters. It's pretty simple stuff, and if you're on top of your roster, it won't be an issue at all, but it is important that you understand the category 2 forfeits and what can cause it. So something that new this year, so point C, which is another point of emphasis that we want to highlight. This is something that we didn't do for a long time, and we got a lot of pressure put on us from you, the players, which was to institute fines for forfeits. So for us, the rationale that we're pushing, and obviously that a lot of players wanted us to do, is that people pay good money to play in our league, and even though you're receiving a victory, a forfeit win, in the end, people are paying to play. So what we're doing is we're saying, we're not we if teams declare forfeit, and sometimes it's going to happen. Sometimes guys have good reasons. Guys are out of town. They're down to a 2 or 3 man roster or whatever the case may be. We understand that sometimes it's inevitable, but we want you to have a bit of skin in the game here. So that means sometimes guys will just say it's inconvenience, so we're just going to declare forfeit. That sucks for the other team. It's obviously something we want to eliminate from the league completely. We hate it. Opposing teams hate it. Everybody, it's just not good. No one likes forfeits. So what we've decided is, starting last fall, is that we now institute a $100 fine for any forfeited game that is a Category 1 no-show forfeit. If you play a game and you're over the cap or something like that, you're not going to be fined. In addition, this is strictly for no-shows. On top of it, what we do is we ask, so at FPF, if you're new to the league, people who've been around the league know that, myself, either by email, by Facebook Messenger, I'm quite accessible, as is Alex D'Aquila, as is Paulo De La Rocca, although he goes by Peace De La Riz, as is, GM Calethris, Mocon, Simon Dashnet. There's a lot of league administrators that are very accessible and make themselves available to the players at all times. We ask that you notify a league administrator, or either by email or someone specifically, at the very latest 2 hours before the start time of the game. If we are not notified, then there's an additional $50 fine that will be added, so that will total $150 of a fine for that game. The reason we do this for the second fine is because once people leave home, that's when it becomes really a bummer. When people show up to a field and they say, "Where's the opponent? No one's here," or something like that, or they're halfway to the field and they have to go back home because they found out at the last minute that there's a forfeit. This is the stuff we really want to avoid. So this is an additional fee or additional fine. By the way, all these fines go directly to the opposing team. So if you do not pay the fine within 72 hours of the forfeit, then you will not be permitted to play in your next game. So we're going to be strict on this. We're going to make sure that teams pay these fines right away. But basically, there are going to be transfers made directly to the other team. So FPF has nothing to do with this as far as collecting money. It's not a cash grab or anything like that. This is strictly for guys. We're just trying to help guys avoid forfeits, and it's not fun for anyone, like I said earlier. So but let it be clear that there's a $100 fine again for any Category 1 forfeit, and an additional $50 fine for any basically lack of notification or late notification. That said, if this is the last game of the season, your team is out of the playoffs, you say, you know what, I'm scot-free, I don't have a next game or whatever, well, then the captain is held solely responsible, and until that money is paid to the opposing team, well, that captain is no longer permitted to play in FPF. So anything to add, Alex?
Nope, that's it for me.
Yeah, this was we got a lot of pressure. Like, it would happen often in the last week of the season, which is where most of the forfeits happen because teams are eliminated. It's normal. We understand guys pay to play and they play to win and compete. And then when their season is done and they're a 1-8 team and week 10 is not really appeasing and they say, you know what, we'd rather just stay home. Well, hopefully these fines help teams avoid that as much as possible. Okay, so moving on to point 6 of the administrative document, player rating system. Let's jump to point C, which is per game format. So very quickly, and this is a very big section, this player rating system. It's obviously become the key component of our league. The whole league is just based on this player rating system, which technically didn't exist until 2014. So it's really taken on such a huge role in our league, of course. So you can read through this carefully, but I would just say that the per game format in point C that's discussed is what's most important. So for people that are new to the league and they're not sure how it works, they say, oh, can I add this guy to my roster? Your full roster can absolutely be over the cap. That's fine. How it works is that it's a per game basis. So as long as you respect the cap every game, then you're fine. So don't think of it as general roster. You can have someone on your roster that only played one game and he may put you over the cap overall. That doesn't matter. So it's a per game basis. So if we jump to point D, it's offense and defense. So both ratings are separate. So you need to be below the cap on offense, below the cap on defense. And just so people know, sometimes guys will write to us and say, oh, well, Alex doesn't play any offense, but he's in our top 6. It doesn't make sense. Well, look, unfortunately, it's hard for us to in-game police every single team in the league. So we don't want to be there and say, okay, like if Alex even steps foot on the field on offense, then he's going to be considered eligible or not. For obvious reasons, this is why we do that. So it's just the top 6 players based on ratings on both sides of the ball, or as you would see them in the verification table, the guys that are highlighted in green. That's what counts against your cap, whether they play the side of the ball or not. Usually it happens to work out that way because those are the guys with the higher ratings, but that's how it works. Point E, QB rating and dual offensive ratings. Alex mentioned this earlier. On defense, you have one rating and one rating only. On offense, a lot of players in our league, a decent chunk, I'd say, maybe about 20% of players in our league, probably a bit less, but have two offensive ratings, quarterback rating and receiver rating. So when you're selecting someone, be sure that you're using the right rating, because some people may have as much as a 25, 30-point difference between the two. It can be quite substantial. So make sure that you know that. Also, if someone has a higher quarterback rating or higher receiver rating and they end up throwing a pass and catching a pass in the same game, the system will automatically use the higher of the two. So you may want to read this whole section about QB rating and dual offensive ratings. There's a lot of kind of minutia in there and specifics that you may want to read and even read twice to fully understand it. This is stuff that we worked on quite a bit over the years to try to take away any loopholes. But basically, that's it. So if someone has two ratings on your team, be sure that you understand that if their higher rating is activated, then that's the one that will be used. Okay, so and of course convert plays count as well. So if someone just throws a pass on a convert, says, oh, well, it's not in the stats, it still counts. All right, point F, new players. So when new players come into the league, they get a base rating. We're not going to evaluate guys off the street based on their name and who they are and where they've come from. So what we strictly do is we allocate them a base rating based on the rating that you are bringing them into the league in. Once they play their first season, of course, they will be reevaluated, and then chances are they'll be put in the right division. But for the first season, it's a base rating.
Just one thing on that note, because it was a hot topic on Facebook. The league does reserve the right to change that rating if the introductory rating does not meet the player. So there are some cases where, and I'm going to throw out a name here, Anthony Calvillo comes in to start throwing in Division 2 or whatever. He's not going to get the base 70 rating in that case. He's going to get a real rating.
Yeah, we'd probably let him throw in D2, but no lower. There's no QB cap in D2, so technically he'd be allowed. But yeah, that's a great point for sure. And that usually happens with pro players, stuff like that. It's very rare, but it has happened. Okay, so jumping to point number 7, which is co-ed specific rules. So for the people who are playing co-ed this season, we have 2 tiers, which are completely separate come playoff time. There are some overlapping games in the season due to an odd number of teams. There are 3 very important rules to know in co-ed. 1, there must always be a minimum of 2 female players on the field at all times. That maximum stays the same even if you're short. So let's say a team may have to play with 5 players. You still have to have a minimum of 2 girls on the field. Second, there's for tier 1, so for caliber 1, there's a maximum of 1 player rated above 85 on the field at all times, and for tier 2, it's 80. So what this means is that it's separate for offense and defense. Someone may have different ratings. Well, most guys, I mean, all guys have different ratings on both sides of the ball. But for the sake of this rule, if myself and my teammate are both rated above 85, we cannot be on the field at once on offense, for instance. Whereas, let's say on defense, if my rating is below 85 and that same teammate is above 85, then we can be on the field at the same time. So very important to know this. This is the only rule in FPF where a captain can technically call timeout and challenge the roster of the opposing team. So the scorekeepers have been notified. It happened all but 0 times last year. So teams understand the rule and they respect it, of course. But if you're a co-ed captain and you're playing a team and you realize that they're violating a rule and 2 players are on the field at the same time that are above a certain rating, you can call timeout, go to the scorekeeper, ask to contest this rule, and if you're found to be right, then basically you would win the game by forfeit. That has to be done on the spot, though. You cannot at the end of the game say, hey, there was a play in the first half where those 2 players were on the field at once. It has to be done while they're both on the field. And then point C is the QB cap in Tier 1 and Tier 2, which works like any other division, 85 and 75.
And Rob, because there are crossover games here, the same cap requirements for each team apply, right? So if I'm a Division 2 team in this case, and I'm playing a co-ed Division 1 team in a crossover game, I still need to bring in only 1 player over 80, and my QB cap is 75, right? I don't match up to that.
You know what, Alex? That was actually one of the co-ed captains reached out to me right away to ask me this question when, you know who it is, when the rules came out, and it's a great question. And actually, the rule that we're going to put in, and again, this will be something we'll follow up with co-ed captains, is actually the inverse of what you're implying, is that when a co-ed team from the Division 2 plays a Division 1 team, we will allow them to actually play up to the cap of the higher team. Crossover games for the lower division teams are usually never really ideal. They're never really, not to say they're not fun, but, teams in Division 2 prefer to just play teams in Division 2. Well, now, we didn't find it would be fair to ask them to play guys in Div 1, but then also not be allowed to to maximize their roster if they choose to. So, not that we're implying that guys should go out and boost their roster for any crossover game, but if they want to bring in someone for a little more reinforcement, the tier 1 caps will apply in those crossover games. Okay, and then last but not least on the document is another new addition this year, and it's point 9. So this is extended delay due to a force majeure. So this was something that was voted upon and passed in the Rules Committee meeting. So let me just bring up the rationale of this idea, because it may be controversial over the course of the season. It may frustrate some people, but it was something that we had to decide upon. So what happens is that every so often, quite rarely, an ambulance is called because someone is hurt and they're on the field of play, and they're immobile in the sense that they don't want to be moved, of course, or it's just safer that way. So the game, of course, is delayed. If someone is off the field, then it's a different story. But if someone is on the field, then we have to delay the game and wait for the ambulance to arrive. What's been happening is that a lot of people play on 2 or even 3 teams in FPF. And as an example, if someone is playing on field 1 at 8 o'clock in Lachine, as an example, and then they play their next game at 9 o'clock, on field 2, what happens is that when there's an injury, we've seen more and more often that players say, wait a minute, now I'm being put in a position where I have to pick between my 2 teams because there's a half an hour delay in my game on field 1. So then my game has been delayed, and then basically I have to miss or I have to choose between my 2 games. That was a problem that was becoming more and more apparent over the seasons. Guys would complain and say, hey, this isn't fair. Obviously they understand that this is, again, a force majeure, something that is out of our control. But if we said we need to formalize this process to make sure that we put guys in a position where it's not total chaos. So what we've decided to do, we had a long discussion about this at our Rules Committee meeting. We decided, we actually originally first spoke about the idea of postponing the game as soon as an ambulance is called. I actually personally thought that this was the way to go, but I was outvoted. It is a democracy here. But the original suggestion was if a game is delayed due to an ambulance, then that game is automatically PPD'd to another date, and it ends. The final half of the game or whatever portion that's left of the game is played at a made-up date. What some people brought up, which is a fair point, is that this introduces a lot of inconsistencies as far as roster. So, A, B, C, and D player were present for the first game, but they couldn't be present for the second game. So now, the guy that we're bringing to replace him puts us over the cap. And, so all these guys don't want to displace themselves for a 6-minute end of game. So there was a lot of valid points brought up that way. So what we decided to do was that for any situation where there is a delay of more than 20 minutes due to a force majeure, which for the most part is ambulance being called, on 1 field. So let's just be clear. Let's say the power goes out at Catalonia and all 3 fields, of course, are affected for 25 minutes or half an hour. This is not pertaining to that. The games would just go on all delayed, and no one would really be affected unless they're driving from one field to another. But that's another thing. So this is for something on 1 field only. If the delay is more than 20 minutes. So this means that if your game is scheduled to start at 8 p.m. and it's been pushed back to anything past 8:20 p.m., then what happens is the game is automatically postponed and rescheduled for the day after the last day of the regular season. So right now the regular season, Alex, ends on Sunday, March, I believe it's 17th. Can you confirm that?
Sure.
So whatever that date is, this year, it's March. Alex will tell us in a second.
I'm just checking the calendar. The last date is the 17th.
Okay, so Sunday, March 17th is the last day of the regular season. The playoffs start on the following Saturday this year. So we gave ourselves a nice little cushion. So what we're going to do is any game that's postponed, just so we don't introduce this thing where, okay, when can you play and when can you play, which would be a total disaster. We've reserved fields on Monday, March 18th, and any game that is affected by this new rule will be replayed on that date. So that's clear for everyone. And how it works is that so it's the team that's playing the next game. So as an example, field 1, 7 o'clock game, an ambulance is called halfway through the game. So the 8 p.m. game, if their game is pushed back to anything past 8:20, then their game is postponed. The challenging part about this, and the frustrating part I'm sure that people will not like, is the fact that those guys playing at 8 o'clock are already going to be at the field. They're going to be changed. They're going to be ready to go. So it is a little bit frustrating for some guys that they're at the field, they're changed and ready to play, and then they have to basically leave and come back at another date. But I mean, again, this doesn't happen often, and people understand that when injuries happen. So that next game was postponed, and then the game that starts at 9 is as properly scheduled, and we continue on with the regular schedule of the night. So you can read this blurb, that's point 9 in our roster rules document. It really outlines it clearly. But this new rule is an extended delay due to force majeure. If the delay brings you to a start time of less than 20 minutes, so let's say 15 minutes, the game will be played, but unfortunately will be shortened somewhat. So let's say the halves, instead of being 22 minutes running time plus 5 plays, it may be 18 or 19 minutes plus 5 plays. The halftime may be shortened. This is something that you can speak about with the ref in the pregame meeting. But again, the 20 minutes delay is really the cutoff, and it's only the game that's immediately following the injury that would be postponed. Then we take up normal game schedule as of the following game after that. If there's any questions, of course, feel free to fire away. You can read this as well. And that's it. So that's it as far as the roster rules and administrative stuff goes. I have a few last quick things I want to point out, and then we're going to bring in Jason, so you can maybe get him on the line, Alex, to bring up the rule changes for 2019. And then, of course, any Q&A that follows is more than welcome. So a few quick points, guys. Week two of the season is when we take our individual and team photos. So we ask you to please be ready and please be on time. I'll send a reminder email to the captains for that. But this is the date. It's obviously, as you can imagine, logistically, it's quite complicated to set up photography for 4 different facilities at once and all these different teams. So if we miss you 1 week, it may be difficult for us to catch you again later on. So we ask that you please take the picture despite guys being injured or absent or whatever. In week 3, the final payments are due. So if ever you have questions about your balance or so on and so forth, you can email me, of course, and I'll be happy to answer you. A friendly reminder to teams that we ask that the referee fees be paid separately. I know a lot of teams prefer to pay by e-transfer, which is great for everyone. But the referee fees we ask you please keep aside. Week 5 and week 11, some people have already emailed me and said, hey, wait a minute, I have a game in week 11 or I have a game in week 5 and not the one or the other. Well, just so you know, week 5 and week 11 are essentially 1 week split in half. We take a bye for the Super Bowl weekend. There are no games on Super Bowl Saturday or Sunday, and those games are then displaced to the weekend of March 16th and 17th. So week 5 and week 11, no one plays on both those weeks. All right. As far as teams making the playoffs and 35 plus and co-ed, which are auxiliary divisions with 8-game seasons, everybody makes the playoffs in those divisions. So if you go on your division overview page, you'll have a breakdown of the playoff breakdown for that division. They'll all be updated in the next day or so. And the rest, like in Division 1, 2, 3, you have 6 teams out of 8 in Division 1 qualifying, 12 out of 14 in Division 2, 16 out of 26 in Division 3, then 16 out of 22 for Division 4A and 4B. In Division 5A, 16 out of 24 teams make it. 5B, 16 out of 26. And then Alex, if you can maybe give a quick briefing of the Division 6 kind of setup. I know there's a grid that we have that was designed by our graphic artist. Basically, just while Alex digs that up, there's 16 teams that end up in the Division 6 bracket and 16 teams in the Division 6D bracket, but they're not necessarily teams that were originally positioned in those places. Right, Alex?
That's correct. And I'm actually just going to go find the article right now.
Yeah.
So we actually did a graphic on this. What we ended up doing was we wanted to make it a little bit easier to understand. Oh, I got to find the article now.
It's if you go to Paulo's most recent article, there's a link to his last one there.
Let me just see if I can grab it. Basically, we always had a problem when it came to Division 6 and 6D since there were new teams. So we wanted to try and figure out a way to split this properly. So there's a whole article. If you go to our site, you'll be able to find it. Division 6, 6D split. Reason, rationale, and Robert Campana is the name of the article. So inside here, there's a whole explanation of how everything works. And then at the bottom, you're going to see what the playoff breakdown looks for this. So there's a whole relegation and, I guess, moving up, moving down system here, which is nice and pretty. Basically, 32 teams make the playoffs across both of Division 6 and 6D. So there's 24 teams that are going to be within Division 6 and the 20 in the Division 6D. So 18 make the playoffs. Yeah, 18 make the playoffs from Division 6 and 14 make the playoffs from 6D. Teams 9 to 12 in Division 6 shift down to the lowest seeds. Seeds 1 to 4 in Division 6D get promoted into those said seeds, and seeds 13 to 18 become the top seeds in Division 6D instead. So there's a whole type of like up and down system that we have to make everything work.
Great. Thanks, Alex. So moving on, a few last points before we bring Jason on. So OC and UR, for people who don't know what those are, because you'll see them in box scores, you'll see them on your player page. We also actually have a section, and maybe Alex, you can show that on the site where they can see the OC UR table. So what these are the two major penalties in flag plus football. OCs are objectionable conduct, UR are unnecessary roughness, and these penalties are logged over the course of the season. If any player totals a 4 OCs and URs combined over the course of the season, they get an automatic 1-week suspension. If they
or three of one
or three of one or three of the other, or a combination of 4, you receive an automatic 1-week suspension. One caveat to be noted is that if you play on multiple teams, these totals are combined. So Division 5 Alex and Division 3 Alex are not separate beings. They are treated as one. So of course you're held to a higher standard if you play on more teams, because essentially you're playing more games. So please, behave out there. Sometimes these things happen. Obviously major penalties are part of the game. But just let that be known. And of course, we have a disciplinary committee, which has been changed now to the Player Safety and Communication Committee. It's headed by Stephen Hodhod. And of course, this deals with all kinds of stuff regarding suspensions, of course, but also player safety. He's going to be working with GM Kalethris to put out some videos to inform players of certain things. And it's really something that we've remodeled this season. And you'll be hearing about it quite soon with some new content. But that's basically how the OCs and URs work. And of course, suspensions can happen and will happen over the course of the season. Fighting is something that absolutely is not tolerated at FPF. Some people come that have played in hockey leagues and soccer leagues, and they say, well, you can throw a quick jab at someone's face and it's 2-minute penalty. Not here. Punches are in no way, shape, or form permitted here. Fighting is completely outlawed. So we expect you to come here and follow those rules. And we have a code of conduct, Alex, that you can maybe show them on the main menu, that you can take a quick read through. It's very short, but it quickly details what we stand for and what we expect from our teams. And then the last section is setups of fields and their specific rules. So Flag Plus Football is a tenant. We rent field space from many different facilities over the course of the season. And all these landlords of ours operate differently. So there are rules pertaining to each facility and what they expect from us, the tenant. I will send over a document to teams in the coming days reminding them of what these rules are. And basically, if you look at a spectrum, Stade de Soccer de Montréal and Papineau, Saint Laurent and Brossard, they tend to be the more strict facilities. They ask you to keep your stuff locked up in a changing room, not bring your boots on the turf. And then Stade Bear, Soccerplex Catalonia, Stinger Dome at Loyola, and Kirkland basically is fair game. Come in, change on the field, come in with your boots. No one will stop you. So some people like one way, some people like another method where it's a cleaner field and stricter policies. But unfortunately, we need to follow those rules. So we ask that you abide by them, and we'll remind you of those over the course of the season. So that's it for me for now. Jason will join us. He'll go over the.
He's here right now.
He's here. Okay, great. So he'll go over the new rules that were voted on by the 2019 Rules Committee, and then of course any questions that come, Jason and I will be happy to answer. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you very much, Rob. Like I think Rob probably already mentioned, if anybody has a question in English or in French, feel free to put that into the group chat, and I'll answer in whatever language the question was posed.
Jason, we already got
for my
one.
part,
What's
I will.
The penalty for a touchdown celebration?
The penalty for a touchdown celebration is objectionable conduct, and the rationale for it being such a major penalty is that oftentimes a touchdown celebration will be viewed by opponents as excessively taunting towards them, and we've seen incidents where even a small touchdown celebration leads to a fight because somebody takes offense to it. So you may take the position as a player that just removes some of the fun of the game. That's a risk that the league has basically decided to take, that we tone down the fun aspect of touchdown celebrations. If you want to give a little high five, a little chest bump, that's about it. If you're doing it in somebody's face, throwing the ball around, spiking it, that's just over the line, and that's going to be penalized with an objectionable conduct foul.
All right, take it away.
All right, so there are quite a small number of rule changes for 2019. The first one is pretty much just a clarification. We actually wrote in which fouls by the ball carrier are going to result in the play being killed. So we have a rule where if the ball carrier commits a foul, we're going to end the play. instead of allowing the play to continue. And for anybody who has played RACQ flag football, these concepts will be kind of familiar. Whereas in the past, in FPF, we would let the play go on and then we would penalize the offense accordingly. So now, if the ball carrier does things like flag guarding, jumping, if the offense commits a penalty for running on 2 consecutive plays or runs in the red zone, all of those would result in a play being terminated immediately by the officials and penalty yardage being applied. The only time, if you will, the ball carrier could commit a foul and us not kill that play immediately is if it's an illegal forward pass. And for anyone newer to the league who would wonder what that means, basically the quarterback has passed the line of scrimmage and then proceeds to throw a pass. So we won't kill that play because essentially the defense could intercept it and bring it back for a return or points. The next one is, I think, a bigger change. In the past, we've had 2 options for where we're going to put the ball after a punt. So as you probably know, if you don't want to go for it on 4th down, you can ask to punt, and the referees will just move the ball further down the field. There are now 3 spots where you could end up after a punt. If you have crossed midfield already, this is not new, and you ask to punt, we're going to put the ball on the opponent's 1-yard line. If you are at your own 10-yard line, all the way up to and including midfield, we're going to put the ball on the opponent's 10-yard line, and that's the old punt rule that we've had forever. And the new one is if you were inside of your own 10, so from the goal line to the 9.5, if you will, and you ask to punt, we're only going to put the ball at midfield. So the idea there is, if you're a struggling young team and, it's 1st and 10 on your 10-yard line and you just ask to punt on 4th and 10 because you didn't get anywhere, it's going to be as usual. We'll put the ball in the other team's 10. But if the other team had a really good defense and they've stopped you inside of your 10, well, we're going to give them a little bit of a bump for that. And if you ask to punt, the ball will go to midfield. So the idea of this rule change was to reward teams with excellent defense. The next one Rob already talked about quite a bit. So it's about the late starts, maybe a little bit more about that. So if a game is delayed by less than 10 minutes, we're going to play the next game as usual. If it's more than 20, as Rob already explained, it'll be postponed. And if it's between 10 and 20, it will be held, but we will reduce the amount of time of the game commensurately by the amount of time of the delay. So the shortest game that we're going to play would be 2 halves of 17 minutes with 5 plays as well on each half. The next one is a minor clarification. We don't allow any jewelry to be worn on the field, so no metal, no watches, nothing rigid, no wearable technology, stuff like that. We have put in an exception to that rule to the effect that medic alert bracelets will be allowed to be worn on the field. And the rationale for that was that we felt that there was a risk-reward to be looked at here, that if a player had a severe allergy, needed immediate medical attention, and did not have his bracelet on or had it covered up, this would create, potential liability for us. So we decided that we would allow that. The next one is quite a big change. It's an offsides pass rule. For anybody who's played touch football, this will sound very, very familiar. So what we're going to do starting in 2019 is if the team with the ball bats the ball forward on a tip ball play, we're going to come back to the point of the tip for the completion. So, let's say Rob's the quarterback, I'm a receiver who's 5 yards downfield, and Alex is the receiver who's 10 yards downfield. Rob throws me the ball, I tip it, and then Alex catches it further downfield than me. As long as he catches that pass, we've got a completion, but we're going to come back to the point of the tip where I was standing. We're going to rule it as an offside pass like this if it is clearly touched by an offensive player. We're also going to rule it as an offside pass like this if it's contested in a group of players. The feeling was that it was going to be difficult to determine if it was an intentional forward tip or by accident, and that we would err on the side of the intentional in the case of doubt. If it's clearly touched by the defense, then obviously this doesn't apply. It has to be from, two players of the offense to each other.
And so, Jason, just on that rule, let's say I'm offensive, I'm a receiver, right? So the ball is destined for me, but it hits me in the hands, and because I have butterfingers, it goes off of them and then goes 5 yards down the field, and another player on my team catches the ball, let's say 5 yards away from where I was. So where, just for clarity purposes, where is that completion going to be ruled complete?
That's coming back to where you tipped it.
Where I tipped it, okay.
This is a clear example of an application of this rule.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
So nothing is stopping it from being tipped backwards towards the quarterback. It has to be tipped further towards where we're going, if you will. And if the first tip is in the end zone and then the ball is completed deeper into the end zone, that's fine. It's going to go back to the point of that first tip, so it's going to be completed in the end zone. But if it was tipped, at the 5 and into the end zone and caught, that's not a touchdown. We're going back to the 5. So we'll see how that rule goes. Like I said, quite similar to how it's done in touch football. Okay, 2 more to go. Illegal participation. We already have a rule applying to the offense for this. So if a receiver goes out of bounds and comes back in, he cannot complete a pass. What we've done is added a rule for any defender who is going to make use of the out-of-bounds area to come back in and deflag an opponent. That's going to become a penalty. We didn't have any treatment for that up until now. So the typical example of this is perhaps there's a ball carrier, there's an immobile teammate, and the ball carrier is kind of using that immobile teammate legally as a screen, and a defender may run out of bounds at the sideline to get around that immobile guy and come back into bounds and then deflag the ball carrier. That would be an illegal action by the defense. So that's going to become a 5-yard penalty. The offense could obviously take the result of the play, but highly unlikely they'll probably go up 5 from where that happens. And then the last one is really just a clarification. We have had a rule for the longest time where if there's a penalty on a convert and the offense is going to end up repeating the convert try, they have the option, obviously, to apply that yardage on the repeated try or on the next possession. But there was a need for clarification of when did they make that decision of how many points they're going for on the repeated try. So they can change from 1 to 2 and vice versa, but they actually need to make their decision of how many points they'll be going for on the repeated try before the decision is made of the application of the yards on the next drive or on the repeated convert. So that's about it for the rules changes. I haven't seen any questions come into the queue, so if anybody has any questions, just fire away.
I don't see them either. We'll wait for chat to catch up just a little bit, but as of right now, we got nothing. So Robert's going to stare at your face for a little bit.
So, thanks a lot, Jay, for coming on board and helping us with this. I guess we put out word maybe a little bit too late today that we were holding this. So a lot of people will probably catch up and watch this after the fact, which is great. Still serves the same purpose, but of course, the Q&A will have to be done, either by email or anything like that. Of course, if you have any questions while you watch this after the fact, feel free to send, the league an email, me directly. If you want to contact Jason, can you maybe share your email so if someone wants to write you a question directly?
Yep, sure. So it's Jason, Jason, Leclerc, Leclerc, @ymail.com.
All right, great, Jay. Thanks a lot. And just so people know, Jason is part of our new referee executive panel, which features himself, Tom Cesari, Steve Hot, Walter Berry, and our referee-in-chief, Leo Gervais. So, Jason's going to be involved in lots of things, officiating, all things officiating, and lots of things officiating this season. So thanks for everything you do, Jay. And Alex, thanks a lot, obviously, for being here and helping us out, as always. So that's pretty much it for this session. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, we will see you at the fields this coming weekend and the week to follow with the start of the winter 2019 season. For the teams that are brand new, hopefully this helped you a lot. And welcome aboard.
Really? That's how you're going to wrap?
That's
Welcome aboard? Nothing else.
This is why PZ and Mo are usually the top dogs, right? The guys here.
Thanks, guys. Have a good season.
See you out there.